Friends, it recently dawned on me that not all of you may be following me on Instagram as much as I would love for that to be the case, and you should absolutely go do so right now, MotoManTV, all one word. But I bring this up because if you only watch here, you very validly think that I have read one book in my entire life, and that's Dave Ramsey's The Total Money Makeover. And as much as I love me some Dave, that couldn't be further from the truth. Now, full disclosure, I haven't always been an avid reader throughout my life. Yes, I love biographies and read biographies throughout my life. But it wasn't until I cut the cable cord completely in 2008 that I really dove into the world of nonfiction and like the food for your brain that it is. So now I bring this full circle and tell you something that the Instagram audience already knows, the MotoManTV Book Club. And what I do is I post a picture of books that I recently read, and I share with you not a review, but rather one or two themes or things that I've learned that is intriguing about that specific author, story, or book. So today, you and I are going to share a smattering of my favorites of the MotoManTV Book Club. Okay, so let's give Dave a little bit of rest over here and focus on one of our friends of the show who also happens to be a best-selling author, Bob Lutz. And a little backstory about Bob Lutz. This man, he really kind of put me in business. He was one of the first big executives that agreed to meet with me, and he's been very supportive of the show throughout the years. And I was reading him before I even got into this world and started with this book, Guts, which some of it is dated now in terms of his view on the Daimler-Chrysler merger, but all of the business advice really applies here. Highly suggest this one. And then this is the book that formed the foundation for our Inside the MotoMan TV episode, which you can watch. I'll put a link up here, where we had Bob come to the Peterson and we talked about his history, his life, as well as this book. And then his latest one, which is now a couple years old, Straight Talk on Leadership, Icons and Idiots. There's a good lesson in here about being a leader. Highly suggest you pick this one up here. Then let's move on to more car stuff. And of course, you know I'm going to show you this, the Lotus book. Now this I would only suggest for people who are freaks about Lotus like myself, but I bring this up for a reason. There are a number of other books in my library that are different marks. Like for example, Ingo CF, he does a great book on Porsche and another one on Mercedes. Same form factor, a lot of pictures, the whole kind of thing, but also great history. He did great research on the two marks. If you're into cars or if you're really into those brands, highly suggest you get those books. Not cheap. This one definitely not cheap because there weren't as many people that would buy this book. Another fantastic book, which sadly I don't have here, that I highly suggest you read, also formed the basis for an Inside the MotoMan Studio episode, and that was Parnelli Jones. He penned a book, and it's not just a history of how he went from being an underage kid trying to race in Southern California. He was racing when he was 14 or 15 without his parents' consent. I mean, this was kind of crazy on his part. And why he's got the name Parnelli Jones, all the way to the businesses that he's put together. The man is quite a mogul in the business world, and then there's great pictures of his racing history throughout the years. So highly suggest you pick that one up. Now let's switch gears to one of my other loves, and this one I have to bring up, and this is pretty much anything from Fleming about James Bond. Now this one, obviously, I've got a collector's edition here with the sleeve and everything, but these are fantastic to have in your library, and this, I don't want to say better than the movies. The movies, this is the one instance where I would say you got to see the movie as well, and they're different, not better, not worse, just different because of the main James Bond characters that breathe a life to the character. I, of course, am a Sean Connery fan, but I have to say Daniel Craig has done a fantastic job as well. I grew up on Roger Moore, though, so I've got a soft spot in my heart for Roger Moore, even though I feel Sean Connery is James Bond. Now, let's press on to another big time, not just hobby, passion of mine, and that is flying. If you do follow me on Instagram, you know that I'm a freak about putting up takeoff and landing of all the different airports I go to and like plane pictures. So that's another reason why you should follow me on Instagram. And just as an aside, if you are trying to build your own social following, don't just tell people, hey, follow me. You're not giving them a reason. You got to give someone a reason to follow you. Explain to them, hey, you should follow me because I post all these great AvGeek pictures on my Instagram, or I post pictures of cars, or as you know, I post a lot of pictures of Kumo. So you got to give them a reason to engage with you, and that's just a piece of advice if you're trying to build a social following. Anyway, let's get back to some AvGeek stuff. These are two great books. For those of you that know me personally, you know I'm a huge Continental Airlines fan. I still call it Continental Airlines because of this man here, Gordon Bethune. This book was written in the 90s. And this book was written for the business world and the aviation world of the 90s, which is incredibly different than the aviation world of today. We'll get to that. But this is not just about aviation. This is how to properly run a business. It absolutely applies today, so much so that both Bob and Gordon, they are friends, and they're both car guys. Gordon has a couple of Ferraris. He's got a Resto Mod Chevy. When he retired from Continental Airlines, all of the employees chipped in and bought him a Harley-Davidson motorcycle. I challenge you to find another CEO that got a Harley-Davidson given to him by his employees. But anyway, I mean, I love this guy. He has an amazing insight on business that if you are running your own business, whether it's a small business or a large business, you will learn a significant amount from this book, even though the aviation industry has basically taken this book and thrown it in the trash, in favor of this book, which is a great book because it talks about the history of Delta Airlines, but not just Delta as in look what Delta did and where they came from, which was basically a crop dusting company in the Southeast, and that's why it's called Delta. This book, Glory Lost and Found, by Seth Kaplan and Jay Shabbat. These guys, they write for Aviation Weekly, so they know the vertical very, very well. They did a significant amount of research, not just into Delta, but also into other airlines and the aviation world in general. Like, they talk a lot about Pan Am here, and I'll get to that in a minute. And they talk about how the aviation world, how it started, and then how it went to the point of deregulation in 1978, and then how it devolved to the point of just after September 11th, and then how the aviation industry had to rebuild itself. And sadly, for most of us that fly, Delta, their model is the one that's been copied by everybody, including United Airlines. Even Spirit has copied from the folks at Delta, and usually the bad stuff. And you will learn why they make those very unpopular choices of charging you for better seats on the plane, why there's less seats on the plane. And really, one of the beautiful things about this is it tells you why there are now 3 major carriers in the U.S. and why there are low-cost carriers not just in the U.S., but in Europe as well as in Southeast Asia. Now, a companion to this, which is already in the MotoManTV Book Club, you need to read Sky Gods. If you are a plane freak or just fascinated about the history of business, Sky Gods is the rise and ultimate fall of Pan Am. And I do not overstate this in any way, shape, or form. Pan Am not only invented the aviation, the modern airline world of today. All of the routes that you and I fly around the world were all chartered by Pan Am, meaning put on maps by Pan Am. They went so far as to they are the ones that were responsible for the invention of the 707 as well as the 747. Highly suggest you read that book. Another companion to this is Joe Sutter's 747. It's simply the name of the airplane, and that book is about how the 747 came to pass, but he too talks about the history of the aviation world and why the 747 came to being because of Pan Am, but also some of the design parameters, why it has the hump, why it wasn't a double-decker all the way through, which gives you a lot of insight as to why the A380 program is failing today. And literally, as I share this with you, it was just announced last week that the first ever A380 that was in service by Qantas is now being retired, and it's going to the Boneyard in Arizona. And what is that? it's not even a 10-year-old airplane. It's a 9-year-old airplane that's going into the boneyard because they can't find anybody to operate it. That's how inefficient it is. And the lesson didn't come from Airbus. The lesson comes from Joe Sutter's book. And if I didn't say so already, he was the chief engineer of the 747. So let's put these aside. And then I'm going to bring to you my latest read, which I'm currently going through, and you can see why. This is a 700-page book. This is twice as long as anything here. And this, I have always been fascinated by Condoleezza Rice. She is, put aside your politics, this isn't about politics. This woman is smarter than pretty much everyone on the planet. She was what they call it a provost. You and I would call it a chief operating officer of Stanford University. She has an incredible experience where she's an expert in Middle East and Russian politics before she got into the government. And then obviously she's had an amazing ride from 2000 all the way to 2008. But what you don't realize is she was in Washington even in the mid-'80s all the way through different, both a Republican as well as a Democrat White House. This woman, I already had respect for her, but the intelligence as well as what I'm learning about the world history that's just contained in this one book, fascinating. If you can stomach 700 pages, you can't get enough of this one. Anyway, let's put this one off to the side. Some other excellent reads. Nick Bilton. If you haven't read Nick Bilton, he is the author of Hatching Twitter. Now, if you don't know this about me, I came from the tech world before I did this. So I did the whole rise and tech boom and bust, the whole thing. So I'm fascinated by that business. And this is now, what is it, Web 2.0 that they consider Twitter as part of. And Nick Bilton did just a fascinating job of cataloging the rise and the ultimate growth and what Twitter has become. And it talks about the personalities behind the scenes. And I challenge you to pick out which personalities are the ones that made Twitter as successful as it is today. So with that, I'm going to turn this around to you guys and ask for your suggestions. And let's keep it to the non-fiction world. I want this to be food for your brain to intrigue you to pick up a book. Or maybe I'll pick up one of your suggestions and share it with the audience here, and definitely on Instagram. And if I didn't say so before, follow me on Instagram. Now you have a hell of a reason. MotoMan, actually gave you 2 reasons in this one. AvGeek pictures as well as book recommendations. MotoManTV all in word, MotoManTV all in word, Facebook, Twitter, Instagram. And with that, I want to leave you with 2 things. Number 1, I am sick and tired of telling you to unsubscribe, resubscribe, click on notifications. Although you should do that, I am going to ask you, please watch our episodes within the first 24 hours of them coming out, because YouTube has screwed up the platform for YouTubers big and small, no matter the genre. So much so, we all call it the ad-pocalypse. True story. And number 2, I want to leave you with a fun fact, and that is about this very book I am holding in my hands here. It was given to me by Bob at his house in Ann Arbor. He signed it. There, he put it right there on the date and the whole thing. But I did a pre-interview with Bob at his house, I want to say a month before the Inside the MotoMan Studio episode. And Bob, he's got a daughter. And the daughter has a thing for those, you know, what are they called? They're domestic cats, but they've been mixed with wild cats. So they look like a tiger. I, of course, want one of these things, but I didn't realize how fierce they were. Well, the entire time that Bob and I were talking, his cat was chewing on this book to the point where the cat chewed up the book. True story. Cat chewed up the book. Oh, and like a part B of the fun fact, when Bob and I got done talking about prep for the show or chewing the fat about girls or cars like normal car guys do, we walk out to our cars. Now he's dressed in his like flight suit because he was going to fly his military check trainer, which he does every Saturday, even to this day as like an 87-year-old. And I'm walking out to a then new C7 Z51. He's getting in his C6 ZR1. And now Bob lives on like this farm road. So I go up to Bob, I'm like, hey man, let's go do a drag race out there. He looks at me, dead straight in the eye, and says, I'd wax your ass. Until I see you next time, bis später.